Hey everyone, welcome to the inaugural episode of Mind Your Own Business. I am Stacey Leick. I'm going to be your host for this fun-filled, informational, entertaining podcast. I've got all kinds of ideas and I'm excited to share all of them with you over time. So make sure you stick around for all of them. You'll know in advance what's coming on the next episode so that you can plan your schedule completely to be able to listen to every single minute, which I'm sure you're going to want to. A couple of things to note. My hands like to fly all over the place, so you can expect things are going to get spilled and knocked over. And even though the producers are probably going to want to edit that out, I'm not going to let them because this is who I am. Just kind of wild and crazy about that. So, on episode 1, we're going to start out. I just want to tell you a little bit about myself, how I came to own my own business, and kind of about this podcast and what you can expect going forward with that. So, I am, as I said, Stacey Leick. I am not a Nebraska native, although I do consider myself one. I moved here in 1973 when I was 9 years old, going into 5th grade. My folks worked at the base in civil service, and my dad was able to just get a transfer to Omaha, Nebraska, where we had never heard of, never been, never really traveled. I grew up in New Mexico, so this was really very different. And I have 5 older siblings. That's another story for another day, but nonetheless, when they graduated from high school, they all moved back to New Mexico, but I stayed here where I met and married my husband and had our girls. My mom and dad lived here, so I never left. So that's kind of my history there. I had quite a career progression that led me to what I do now, which is I am the owner of Buttered Marshmallow. In this picture that you see here are some of my favorite cakes from a photo shoot that I did a couple years ago. Did I ever know I wanted to own a business? No, not really. Did my husband know he wanted to own a business? Yes, he did. He owned a few, including a couple of bakeries in Omaha that you might be familiar with. One of them is Martin's Pastry. They were on 83rd and Maple. Used to be on 40th and Hamilton. Everybody knew that. The other is Eminger's Bakery. They started out in South Omaha. And when we got into the early 2000s, both of those bakeries were thinking about closing, and we bought them. So that kind of led into my little bit of baking experience, bakery owning experience. But I ended up not being involved in the bakery, but I did learn a lot about business. So we'll talk about that too. So my career path, when I got out of college the first time, because I went and got my associate's degree in business administration, I worked at a series of jobs that progressed in responsibility, and each one of them applied what I had been doing in the prior jobs so that my experience level really grew. Started out working at a hotel as the business, what was I at that hotel? Meeting coordinator. Yes, that's exactly what I was, meeting coordinator. So people came in, they wanted to host meetings there or have wedding receptions or parties or bridal showers, whatever. I was responsible for setting up the meeting, coordinating that, doing the logistics. So I really learned a lot about how to set up a proper meeting. My next job was as an administrative assistant and then special projects coordinator at an employee benefit consulting firm. So that was a little bit different. But one of the things that I was able to do in that role was to help coordinate meetings that we had. And I used my experience from the hotel to plan these events, including the food and the setup and the room layout and the guest invitations. And I did a great job. Even my old boss said so. I found my reference letter yesterday, and yeah. That's where I met my husband. And after about 5 years of working there, we got married, and I left to be a housewife and take care of our kids got 3 grown daughters. 2 of them live in Omaha with me. Well, not with me. They live in Omaha. And then one lives up in Minneapolis. And after a few years of being a housewife and stay-at-home mom, my husband and I bought a business. And he ran the business, which meant I needed to go out and find a different job so that we could have money coming in to pay the bills. We owned a sign company, and I went and worked for a computer company selling computers. So I think I was pretty good at selling, even though my clients were all internal customers. So if they wanted a computer, they had to buy from me. Well, it was pretty good because that meant my sales were locked in. But I didn't really like the job. It was just not quite my thing. The sales part was my thing, but not the computers, mostly because I didn't understand them. And it was before computers were on every single desk. In fact, I remember a funny story where I wanted to buy a computer, and this was a long time ago, where people were buying compact 286s and 386s, and the 486 had just come out, and I think it had something like 4 meg of memory. Okay, laugh. I know I'm laughing too inside. And I wanted a 4 meg computer, and the tech guys laughed at me and said, you would never use that much memory, which is really hilarious because one video on our phones now is probably twice that. But anyway, I stayed there for a while, and then I went to work as an office manager for an employee management development and change firm, which was to this day still the most impactful job that I've ever had. It really taught me to look into myself to figure out who I was and how I was going to grow going forward. And I think I learned a lot at that job. My gosh, I still think that even though I only worked there for 18 months, it was like 96 years in dog life. What I really learned from that job was I am strong. And I got that from my mom. I just didn't realize it. I left there and I went to work for ConAgra. And in that role, I worked in investor relations. So I was dealing with Wall Street almost every day, which was really awesome and cool. Talking to analysts who were buying stock for 401k portfolios. I think one of the greatest highlights I had while I was there was talking to an investment buyer who ended up buying $4 billion of stock for their 401k portfolio after our conversation. That was pretty cool. I think another one was when I actually got to go to the New York Stock Exchange and stand on the trading floor, not up in the balcony where all the minions go, but I was on the trading floor. And it was during a time when the exchange went wild. If you remember when Bill Clinton was president and had that little not thing with Monica Lewinsky, I was standing on the trading floor when the video that Linda Tripp had made, or the recording, blew up. That was just an incredible time, unrelated to what I do in business, but it was an exciting thing that I still talk about to this day. So those are a couple of highlights. And then my boss retired, and I just left with him and took a one-year job working at a church just to be near my girls who were going into junior high. And when I left that job, that's when I started at the place where I was at for 18 years. It was my last job in corporate and will always be my last job in the corporate arena. In that job, I was the director of marketing, and we were a small company, so I learned pretty much how to do every single role in that company, even though many of them weren't parts of my job. Because we were small, they'd get rid of people, we absorbed responsibilities, and I have always wanted to learn more, so I would take it upon myself to figure out how to streamline things, just become more efficient. So while my role was marketing, I also was responsible for some financial reporting. I took on the role primarily I was the vendor relationship manager primarily, even though we had an inventory department, I still did that. I also was responsible for inventory management in a weird way because I was in marketing. But it was because I learned how to use the computer as my friend instead of shying away from it and wanting to use paper and pencil, which now I absolutely love. I also had some roles in customer service, although not very much, but a little bit, in training, helping to write scripts, and with the salespeople in making sure that they understood the products, helping with when our vendors would come in and do training for the sales reps. So I really learned a lot about running a company. In fact, I learned pretty much everything about how to run a company. And I think I knew that I was getting to a point where I needed to leave when I decided I could run their company better than they could. I think a lot of us get to that point. Most of the time it's not true, but I really felt like if I couldn't run their company better than they could, I needed to go so that I could run my own company. And in 2017, I decided that I was going to leave that company and do something else. And I gave myself about 13 months with a cutoff date of October 1st of 2018. I was going to walk out the door and never look back. And I did not know what I wanted to do. So I had some time to think about it. And in August, or actually it was the first day of fall that year, I went on a camping trip with my friends to Fremont Lakes. It was the first day of autumn, and one night we were having a marshmallow roasting contest. And my friend Bacon, Kelly, was the judge. Her sister and her boyfriend were there, and me. And we all making our marshmallows. Well, you know how marshmallows are over a fire. That night we had corn on the cob, and I saw the butter scraper. You know what I mean, the one where you have to roll the butter over the corn on the cob, and the butter just oozes all over the corn. And I thought, I wonder what that would be like on a marshmallow. So I put the butter on the marshmallow, put it on the stick, and expected that it would flare up and catch on fire, but it did not. What it did was caramelize into this golden brown, bubbly, caramely, sugary, gorgeous thing, just this thing. And I took a bite of it before I handed it off to the judge. I wanted to make sure that my product was acceptable. And it was amazing. It exploded in my mouth like nothing I'd ever had. It actually exploded on my face as well. So I knew I had something. So I made the marshmallow again for Kelly, for Bacon. And first she judged her sister Jenny's, and that was, it was beautiful. It was burnt a little bit and kind of delicious, and she ate it, and she said, oh yes, this is very, very good. And then she judged Mike's, and he was more of a raw marshmallow guy, so his was just a little bit brown on the sides, and it was a raw marshmallow, and it was just fine. And then I handed her mine, and she says, oh, now this is interesting. It's caramelized and golden brown, and there's some black spots on it. And she took a bite, and her face lit up like nothing you've ever seen before. And she's like, oh, my gosh, this is it. This wins best of all time ever. And I knew right then I had just created something so amazing and magical, but I didn't really know what I was going to do with it. Now, I had been baking cakes kind of just for fun, and I would talk about these cakes to everybody I met all the time and try to sell them. In fact, I did sell a cake to everybody I ever talked to. And somewhere along the lines, it hit me. I think what I'm going to do is bake. I'm going to bake out of my house and sell cakes. I know I can sell. I figured out all I have to do is sell 3 cakes a day. 17 cakes a week at an average of $35 per cake to be able to manage all of my expenses because I live pretty frugally. But I couldn't think of a name for the bakery. A few months later, actually, it was not very much longer. It was in October. I was at a networking event, and one of the things they had set up was a s'mores station outside. So we were making s'mores, sitting by the fire, and one lady came up, just started kind of chatting with her about the marshmallows, and I said, oh my gosh, I got to tell you about this buttered marshmallow, and here's what you do. Then I think if you put it on the s'mores, it would just be great. It would explode in your mouth. It's like a big party. And she looked at me and said, that's what you need to name your bakery. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that is a great idea, Buttered Marshmallow. And that is exactly how the name Buttered Marshmallow came to be. And what a great name it was. What a great name it is. In fact, I have big plans for it in my head. Hopefully they'll come to fruition. We'll see. So that was in October of 2017, and I still had 1 year to get everything going for what I was going to do. And now I knew I had a bakery. And so what I decided to do was every single day for 365 days, I was going to do one thing for my bakery. Didn't matter if it was big or small, but I had to do one thing every day. What I figured is if you do 365 steps, you're going to accomplish maybe half of what you need to do to be able to run a business. But if you don't do half of that, you're not going to be prepared. And because I was leaving a comfortable job that paid my expenses and left me time to travel and play a lot of golf, I needed to be sure that I was set up and ready to go. So that's what I started doing every day as I had a name. And then I would maybe look into how much ingredients were going to cost or how much a business card was going to cost. I looked into the laws. I looked into just pretty much everything. How was I going to set up my bakery? All the steps that you have to take. And I actually have them all written down here. And there are a ton. There are like 800,000 million steps to running your own business. I remember one of the funny things that happened is I was going to play golf one day after my corporate job, and when I got to the golf course, I realized that I had not done anything that day for my business. Like, crap, I need to do something. And I was playing with a woman, Kelty, and we belonged to the same club, but I had never played with her before. So in my typical fashion of getting to know somebody, I asked her, so what do you do, Kelty? She said, I work at a food lab. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. A food lab, what do you do? She goes, we we determine nutrition for food products. I'm like, are you kidding me? You're a nutritionist type person. No, we're definitely a scientific lab. So if you want to figure out the nutrition values for something you're eating or something you're selling or making, you just send in your product and we run it through our system. What they do is so I asked her actually, so do I bring in my ingredients? Do I bring in my recipe? Do I bring in components? No, she said, you just bring in a whole cake and we just stick it in a blender and then run it through the analysis that way. So even by accident, that day I was able to determine how to get the nutritional value for my cake because of the labeling requirements of the state. And it was that sort of thing that happened quite regularly that made me realize that I was on the right track and doing the right thing. Something else that I wanted to do in my bakery is have pink boxes. Everybody knows what's in a pink box when you walk in. There's never any question. And in fact, veering off again to another funny story, I was making a delivery to the guy that was doing my taxes. He'd ordered something for Valentine's Day for his office. And I actually ended up going into the wrong building because I just was lost. Who knows? I have terrible directional sense. And I walk into this office with a pink box in my hand, and the lady at the desk says, "Oh my gosh, that looks delicious." And I laughed in my head. I thought terribly, "Oh my gosh, this box could contain dead rats." And people don't even know. They just see that pink box and they love it. And that was again when I knew, oh gosh, I'd done the right thing. Well, getting back to the pink boxes, when my husband and I had owned the bakeries, I really wanted to have pink boxes. And he kept saying to me, they're super expensive. But I thought that the cost benefit analysis was going to work out. He didn't agree. That's all right. I started looking at the cost of pink boxes when I was thinking about the bakery, and guess what? He was right. They are expensive. A white box is about 10% of the cost of a pink box, but I still wanted them. I just felt like that was going to be something that was going to set me apart. So when I was in this year of planning for my bakery, I thought I'm going to actually start buying some supplies, just little bits here and there, so that when I'm ready to start baking, I have what I need. And one of the things was the pink boxes. Well, what I wanted to order were 100 cake boxes and 100 cupcake boxes with the cupcake inserts and the boards that you need to have something in a cake box. But they were $200. And I'm like, well, $200 are going to last me a year, so that's not a bad thing. But I had the $200. It was just really hard to pull the trigger because I wasn't going to need them for 8 or 9 months. Well, I had attended a trade show, filled out a survey for a marketing company, and I got a letter in the mail that I had won, as there was a drawing attached to the filling out the survey, and the prize was a $200 gift card. I could not believe it. So I got this gift card, and I reached out to Webstaurant store, and I bought my pink boxes. It's another great step. So my bakery, Buttered Marshmallow, my tagline is the Pink Box Bakery. And I love it when I go somewhere and I walk in with a pink box, I will hear people say, "Is that buttered marshmallow? Is that buttered marshmallow?" And I'm like, yes, it is. I'm the buttered marshmallow lady. Super exciting. It's like I'm a celebrity in my own mind, but it works out. So anyway, we get to getting toward the end of that year. I've done 285 steps. I was true to myself on that. And it's probably actually closer. I've done about 330, and we're getting about a month away from when I'm going to quit. I'd gone into my boss on August 9th, 2018, the best day ever, and said, "I'm resigning on October 1st. And he sat back, put his hands behind his head, and said, "Wow, I was not expecting this." And ended up telling me that they were selling the company. And part of the stipulation was that all of the senior management staff had to be in place at the day of the transfer. Well, I'm like, gosh, well, you've got 6 weeks to get a replacement, so better get busy. And it got to be, they did not do anything to get a replacement in. They didn't interview, they didn't hire, they didn't announce that I was leaving, they did nothing. So 3 days before I'm going to quit, we go to lunch, my boss and I said, gosh, I haven't met anybody. Did you get somebody hired? And he looked at me and said, "Gosh, Stacey, I was under the impression you had changed your mind and weren't going to leave." I'm like, "Yeah, no, you weren't. I think you made that up in your head because I am leaving in 3 days." And he said to me, "Well, shoot. I guess I'm just going to tell the new owners that you walked out without notice." So that right there is part of the reason why I did not want to work for these people anymore. But that conversation led to an interesting exchange where he asked me to just meet the new owners and see what I thought. And then if I wanted to quit, I could just quit. Because part of my timing was I wanted to be able to start my bakery before the holiday baking season started so that I would have a good jump start on that. And I thought, what's another couple of weeks? Well, it turns out that I met the new owners. They didn't really know anything about the job I was doing. I was quitting because I wanted to. They were super nice. And I just decided, you know what? I don't have to quit. I'm doing this because I want to. And I ended up staying, telling myself, I'm just going to stay and take their money. I'll still work until I don't want to do this anymore. And it was a really great decision, which I'm going to delve into in episode 2, where I will lead you through kind of what happened in the first 8 months of the business. And then I'm going to do a little bit of handwork, making some treats while we're talking, and then talk to you about what I've got coming up in the next few episodes. So thank you very much for listening to my story. I find it completely intriguing. I hope you do too. I think it's a great story about just being able to see something in your head and follow your dream, even if you don't even know it's your dream, and find success. Now I'm signing off, and I'll see you next time.